Okay, so I'm going to repeat myself. So often, if I'm going to do a very elaborate painting, I could draw this out in very great detail and then transfer it to a clean sheet watercolor paper. An advantage to that is I would be able to shift the drawing to center it more rather than relying on just wherever I happen to try to line it up. Also, I could have put it on a larger sheet so I wouldn't have cut off the tips of the wings at the bottom, but I just decided to go alla prima or al fresco, which sort of means something like straight on to nature, something like that. I'll generally use, don't use flats so much, but I like filberts. If you're not really familiar with painting, filberts are the longish ones with the rounds. If they're shorter, they're called brights. And angles, I like angles. And then I have detail brushes. Some of my detail brushes are getting pretty sad. This one's pretty sad. I think I'm going to retire that one. I've got another one over here. Somewhere I have a set of really nice watercolor brushes, but I can't find them. They can be very expensive, but these are adequate. If you want to spend money on anything, spend it on the brushes. The brushes are probably the most important thing to spend your money on. Okay, so another thing that we like to do with the watercolor. So it's good to have a little spray bottle like this, simple spray bottle, and just wet down your palette a little bit. With watercolors, it's so much nicer than with acrylics that just dry up and then you can never use them again. And oils that take so long to dry and are a little toxic if you don't have good ventilation. So watercolors are not for sissies. They're definitely not child's toys. They take a lot of patience and understanding and willingness to let things happen, which not everyone is willing to do. But if you want to, another thing, if you want to recreate a watercolor look on a digital media, it's a super good idea to practice it in traditional media so that you understand how it actually works. Okay, so I have to get back into the painting mode. I was working on here. I'm going to go up here. These are much lighter, brighter colors, and there's a little bit of purple even in the top bit. So I'm going to start up with that, I think. I got my water. When you're working, have your light to the right of you if you're right-handed, and put it on the left if you're right-handed. Since you don't want to shadow your own work. If you tend to rub your hand on things, you can get an acrylic bridge like this that will allow you to place, if you want to rest your hand on something without touching your artwork. That's pretty useful. So let's hit it up with a little bit of, I know you can't really see my palette with my painting, but that's okay. I'm going to do a little bit of the purple with a little bit of what I think used to be possibly ultramarine. It's hard to tell. It's okay if your palette gets really dirty. In fact, a woman that taught me almost most of the stuff that I know about watercolors said that you should always have a dirty palette. And that's mostly because your colors straight out of the tube aren't really very natural. Of course, it does depend a lot on what you're trying to do with it. And I'm trying to do something more organic, more natural, more like the real thing. And then there's other little tricks. So, answer to your question. This palette, I like this palette because it folds up, but I won't fold it up because it's wet. It also has a thumb hole so you can hold it if you're side, and you can put your brushes in it. I don't remember what the brand name of it is, but sometimes I just use a plate. That works perfectly fine too. There's a whole bunch of systems you can get that actually have wet towels that keep things moist, or you can put turpentine in it and it seals it up and it keeps it from drying out. But that's a little more than I really need. If you're talking about the paints that I use, my general rule of thumb is you try to have so I pulled a little color out. You can actually do that. You can't go back to white, so you do have to preserve your whites. But I did want to pull a little bit out, and it looks like it's a little bit of cerulean blue on this part of the feather here. Yeah. So when you set up your palette, or when you get your colors, I like to get the tube colors. You can actually do a whole painting with just 3 colors. It's called a triad, and there's all sorts of ways of doing triads. But I always have a cool and a warm of each of the basic primaries and secondaries, and then throw in a few, and it's the earth colors, of course, and then throw in just a few of the strange ones that I find that I like that are kind of cool, like different purples and things that I wouldn't normally use. So probably the trickiest thing about watercolor is to preserve your whites. If you have the patience and the time, you can do that with a masking fluid, which is a little bit of like rubber cement that will allow you to block off parts of the painting. Now, I can't always talk and paint at the same time, so forgive me. I'm going to paint each feather independently so that they create their little border. You let them dry a little bit in between. These feathers are cool because they have a little bit of this darkish tinge. Just put that on while it's still wet. That's called wet into wet, and it makes it really... I can pick a little bit of it up so I don't put too much of it down. But it'll just go right on where it's already wet. So I'll move on to a different area so I can let that dry a little bit. So I tend to bounce around a little bit more with watercolors than I would with oils. Oils, I'll tend to work over the whole canvas pretty evenly, and also work on a neutral gray or earth-toned base. There's that funky purple in there again on this side. Oh, it's not quite dry enough yet. You can do glazing with watercolors, and people don't always know that. You can layer up the colors because watercolors are transparent, sort of like oil paints. And it's one of the advantages of watercolor is their transparency, which allows you to do some really cool effects. I sort of have sketched in here the 3 different rows of the feathers, so I think that I cut this in a little too tight. Should be more out, but I'm gonna just keep working with it. Sometimes you just have to live with the decisions that you make. That's one of the great things about working with traditional media, is that it forces you to make decisions that you might not make on a digital platform. So there's an endless ability to redo or change, copy, adjust. So things are almost never final in a way.
Is there any kind of rule about when to do the background?
No, I don't think there's a rule about it. I mean, you just kind of work it in with the rest of it. You could do the whole background first and then paint and then preserve your whites. You could even preserve the whole bird and then do the whole background like a wash. And that would be one way to do it. As long as the bird itself isn't wet when you do the background. But now you're right, I'm going to have to go in really close around the edges of things, which may not be so much fun. Or just work it in at the same time as a sort of almost like an abstraction. And certainly when you add the background, it's going to change the nature of the painting because it'll change the color. The colors will appear, they won't change them, but they'll appear differently. I wanted to leave a little white spine on that feather and I didn't get it. And absolutely, Charles, you're right. If you have to accept what you've done and accept the choices that you've made with your media and then make decisions, you'll actually be a lot more creative. Plus, you'll tend to finish things. I find that sometimes the digital media it just never ends. You never finish it because you can always do a new version of it or do some change to it, or you don't have to live with the decisions that you make and then figure out how to fix them, make them work for you. It's just a never ending, it never ends. So I also like the fact that you have a finished product, a one-of-a-kind finished product, where you never have a one-of-a-kind product on a digital work. It's always going to be an infinitely, perfectly copyable. So there's never an original because the copies are just as good as the original, which is great on one hand, and on the other hand, you never have an original, and that's kind of sad. So I'm going to put a little more feather down here. There's a definite white area here that I want to try to isolate and not paint over. I like how the feathers change colors so dramatically when it crosses over that middle bit. So what I'm doing, this is a technique that I usually do with oil paints, is I dry my brush and scumble. And so it's not, I don't think it's the same, you don't get the same scumbling effect in watercolor that you do with oil paint. It's just a habit I have from painting with oils. So I'm going to be short a couple of feathers on this part here. I might just go ahead and add one out here. Well, my technique is totally made up. The only thing that I really use that I learned was to let my palette get dirty and keep it dirty. And that seems to have been a useful bit of information. This would be a lot easier if I had drawn out every single feather so that I wouldn't have to keep looking at it and checking it, but it's okay this way too.
Also, too, I liked it when you would call up the screen on I think Photoshop and put the lines over it.
Yeah, can definitely. I'm afraid my Photoshop will crash because it's still crashing, but I can bring up the grid if I am actually in the Photoshop program, which like so. There, like that. But I'm at the point right now with the work that I don't think that I need to worry about the grid. And I can be just concentrating on making the, yeah, I'm not really happy about the way that turned out, but it's okay. You just live with it. Put a little more dark in here. That'll help that appear to be more white. So if you can't get any whiter than white, so the only way to make things look whiter than white is to make everything around it darker. I've got these middle feathers I need to deal with.
Someone asked a question about how do you know you'll get the same color every time?
I'm using the same colors out of my palette tray. So I'm mostly using the purple with this blue for that purpley one, and the cerulean, and then there's a little bit of cobalt over here, I think. I'm not totally sure what the names of the colors are. And ultramarine definitely over here. And I think I've got some indigo here. I just kind of, how do I know for sure? I don't know for sure. But I know close enough, I guess, that I can fake it. Does that make sense? 1, 2, 3, 4. So this fourth feather here, this should be a bit more soft right here. So I might paint on this for a while. If I don't finish it tonight, then I'll work on it some more on Friday. And then at the end of it, I'll have my daughter edit down the video so that it speeds up if you want to look at it, speed it up through the boring bits of me just painting and not making any sound. And she'll put music in the background, which is helpful. I think I'm getting lost in the feathery things. I feel like I need a lighter blue, but I don't have one, so I'll just have to water it down a little bit more. And then make the other part a little bit darker. So the one way to make things whiter is to make what's around it darker. You can't make anything whiter than white.
What you did that one time when you changed the backgrounds in different colors and you could really see how the colors changed, that was really amazing to me.
Yeah, it's
When you,
really cool.
yeah, drawing on different colored paper and stuff.
Yeah, the color of the background can make a huge difference in the way the colors come across on the piece itself. Oh man, I screwed that up. Let's see if I can fix that. Do this more like this. This funny purple color that comes on the inside of this flat feather. So not everybody likes to mix their paint on the paper. Some people like to have very specific colors pre-mixed on their palettes, but I always end up mixing it on the surface. Okay, so now we're going to have this more of another thing. When you go away and come back to something, you can see the things that might be wrong. There's this one, and I didn't put a little notch in that feather. Let's see if I can do that by pulling some paint out. Just get some water in there and get your brush really dry and suck it up. You can also use things like Q-tips and tissues to pull paint out. You can do some really cool things with making shapes, covering something with tissue paper and stamping it. So that makes really interesting shapes. I did a little sunset or moonscape where I pulled the moon out using the end of a spool of thread wrapped in tissue. That was kind of fun. Okay, so in order to save my sanity, I'm going to just lightly sketch in these feathers here so that I'm not freaking out and mispainting things and getting frustrated. So painting should be a pleasure, not a pain, right? Right. So there's a certain point where it probably won't matter how detailed it gets because, of course, it's like a texture. And the texture, as it moves across the surface of the animal, will disappear and reappear depending on the angle of the light. Okay, so there's the notched feather There's the next one. This is the next one here. And each feather is like teeth, is defined by the feather next to it. So that's another good thing to remember. And at some point, you really don't see the division of the feather. It starts to just be one feather. And just a muted texture after that point. And I think, 1, 2, 3, I didn't put this bird's tail in the right place. So it is often good to let your drawing just sit in between. Okay, Victoria, no problem. Are you still there? If you want, Friday's the next one. And if you see she's gone, if you send me an email, I can always send you an update. Oh, and I didn't, you never add white to watercolors. Not really. White is opaque, and watercolor by its nature is transparent or translucent. And that's why you have to preserve your whites. Now you can, of course, you can always go in and add white if you want to. You're the artist. You can make those kinds of decisions. But generally speaking, in a traditional watercolor, you do not add white. But you can scrape it. You can use white, an acrylic white or a gouache, but it tends to be a little chalky. And it's, you know, it's really, it's art, so anything goes. But traditionally, if you think about, if you go with the traditional methods, does that make sense? So you don't have to be hemmed in by tradition. If you do something that's weird and different and you like it, then that's totally fine. So if you like to go in like with a paint pen or a paint marker and pull out the whites with that way, that would be fine too, if you like the way it looks. So you're always taking a little bit of a risk when you do that, because it might not work, and then you're stuck and you have to deal with the consequences.
Like you said about making a pattern, and I thought that if I was going to do a background, maybe I would do a pattern for a background and leave out the, the foreground.
Yeah, you can mask out the bird. Get some masking fluid is not expensive. You could use tape or you could use masking fluid and just put it over the bird itself and then do the background so that it kind of flows, or the pattern flows, or you can use stamps. You can also, there's cool things you can do with watercolor, like salt. You can put salt on it. It makes it really, really cool texture and almost an abstraction of a pattern, but it's still, it's fun. It's fun to experiment with those kinds of things, but just remember that you have to live with your experimentation. That is always the kicker. Don't think that's quite the right color of blue. I think I want it to be a little more ultramarine-y. Definitely too dark. But I'll tend to go a little too light. It's better to go too light than too dark. You can always glaze it darker. It's much harder to pull that color back off like I'm trying to do now. And there's only so much abuse that the paper will take. After a while, the paper will give up. And then you're stuck with paper that's not happy with you. I'm going to, so I'll see, I'll still go back in and work the other parts, especially after they dry a little bit, so that I can play with the edges a bit more. Yes, certain areas are making other areas look darker and lighter. And Charles, you should be getting my emails. And if you're not, if you've changed your email, send me a new email. It's I send it out every month. I send out the new schedule, and currently I'm doing Tuesday nights, Friday afternoons, and Sunday afternoons. Which comment? I wouldn't use acrylic on a watercolor painting unless I was desperate. I don't know if that was the answer, the question that you were asking. It thinks I'm a fraud. Well, that's nice to know. I think you can still go to the old Wix site, and it should be listed up there, but I'm not sure. That's a maybe. And I'm taking vacation soon. When I take vacation, I will fix my website because it's gone on far too long being not usable. Yeah, I like iCloud too. Okay, I'm getting tired of painting blue, so I'm going to do something else. I'm going to paint. Got green and yellow going on here. I think I need more green. Green is probably the hardest color in the world to paint correctly. It's probably why I'm not much of a landscape artist. It's also one of the hardest colors to use digitally. It's kind of fugitive. It tends to, when you knock the colors down on it's not dark enough. You knock the colors down, it tends to get rid of too much of the greens. So it's a little hard, a little bit harder to manage. You see, this is where a dirty palette comes in handy, because the green out of the tube is too fresh. It needs to be subdued. Yeah, I got rid of the kitty paw prints. I actually found the painting on the floor upside down. He'd been rummaging around in my desk. Dang cat. Okay. Yeah, there's lavender down there too. I haven't done that yet. I'm going to stop. I'm going to put a little bit of this greeny, yellowy transition in here. And pick this up next time because it's already 9:30 and you guys must be bored. But I'll post this, send a link to anyone who's on my mailing list, and we'll be back. We will finish this thing on Friday for sure. All right.
I'm amazed at the painstakingness of it.
Pardon me?
I'm amazed at the painstakingness of it.
Well, I'm a little rusty with watercolor. If I was really up to speed, I would probably be able to go a lot faster. And I'm probably going to do a lot of glazing. I don't know. It's like it's not a fast process. I don't think it should be. It should be kind of painstaking in a way because
Right. I want to get that back. And from watching you, I know that I can work on my artwork again like I used to. I wasn't as quick as so hurriedly as I am now.
well, I know that you do draw really fast, and it might be a good exercise to slow down a little bit and just make it a meditation and not so much
Yeah,
of a rush.
right. So watching you do this makes me learn that a little bit somehow.
Cool. Well, I hope to see some of the results of that. I would like to see how that works out for you. I'm just going to put the blue in here because I can go in and put the shadow parts in and some of the details when it dries a little bit more. So we're getting there. A few places to do down here, and then the tails, and then we'll do the back. And and then Bob's your uncle, right? All right. So until next time.